All right, welcome back to another TouchDesigner tutorial. And in this one, we're going to look at how to use the face track chop to create some really interesting interaction with your art piece or whatever you're working on, your projects, your 3D scenes, anything. So we're going to look at these 4 examples, and there's this 5th one actually, which I'm going to show soon or share soon. So here, basically, we're looking at one image and then at a second one when we change our perspective. So this is also based on face tracking. And these examples are what we're going to do in this video. So here we're actually using the face tracking to kind of act as a flashlight. So we're kind of looking at different parts of the image and also doing a bit of like a parallax movement there. Then we have this feedback tunnel example. So as you can see down here, when I'm moving my head in certain directions, it kind of seems like that tunnel is responding to it, and it really feels like you're kind of laying down on the floor, for example. So it's really quite interesting, like a perspective thing. And then here, what we're doing is actually setting up a 3D network, and we're literally changing the camera to be more or less, like the same as our perspective. We're kind of linked to our perspective, and with that, we can kind of explore different sort of light reflections on an object and things like that. So we're doing the same kind of setup in this one, where we're only using left and right to kind of explore these 3D spheres here, this kind of grid. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get started and make this from scratch. So as always, I'm going to delete everything. And I'm going to start with a video device in. So this is what we're going to need for the face tracking. I'm going to change it to the highest signal format I can get on my shitty webcam. Then I'm going to add a flip to this, as well as a null, which I'm going to call null input. Then I'm going to add a face track job and just use this on here. So basically this top is now my null input top. And you can already see we're getting some data. So if I move to the left, it kind of responds here with the channels in the face track chart. We want to smooth out these signals a bit. So let's do that right away with the filter. Maybe set that to like 0.3 or up to 0.5. And then I'm going to use a select here and just copy and paste this 2 times, because what we want to have is a TX, TY, and a TZ value or a channel. So I'm gonna select the B box U here and rename it to TX, and select the B box V, so bounding box V here, and call that TY. And for the third one, we're gonna select the bounding box for the width, and we're gonna call that TZ. It's just kind of gonna be our depth that we work with. So I'm gonna add a math here, and on my math, I wanna rearrange this and kind of normalize the values so we can work with 0 and 1. We don't have to worry about that later. So kind of when I move to left and right here, so if you look at the B box U, is roughly between like 0.1 and 0.9 or 0.8 and 0.2, something like that. So I'm just gonna work with like 0.15 and 0.85, something like that, which is gonna be the minimum and maximum of where I'm working with. So actually on my flip, I haven't actually flipped this, so it's got to be like that. So now that kind of responds well to my movement. If that, doesn't feel completely right with going from 0 to 1, we can still adjust this maybe to 0.2 and 0.8, so I don't have to move as much. I'm also gonna show that here on the right, so you can see when I move and how I move. I don't usually like to do that, but here I guess it's necessary. So I'm going to use the same values for TY. For TZ, I already know I want to use 0.1 and 0.3. So kind of how close I am to the camera. These are values that kind of work. You can still adjust to whatever setup you have. Okay, so from here, I'm going to create a base. And I'm going to call this one simple texture. I'm going to go in there and just add an in chop, copy it to two times, and then add these here. For some reason, with several chop channels, doing the collapse selected didn't work out very well. So this is the way to do it. I'm gonna set the operator viewer here to ./bg, and then let's move in here. So I'm gonna use a math here again. So we want to rearrange it. We normalized it with the maths before, and now we want to rearrange it to whatever we're working with. So I'm going to call this face x1, and or 0 to be a bit more clean here. Face x0, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. And I'm going to call this face y0, and again copy it and call it face z0. Let's actually add a movie file in here and use this image or any other image really. And then I'm going to add a constant to this. And so we're kind of just using this connection to make it to have the same resolution. I'm going to make that black, and I'm going to add a circle here. On my circle, I'm going to change the output to swap order and then subtract. So now I just got a nice black background and then sort of like this transparent circle on it. I'm going to change the softness to 0.2, and now we can add an over here and just put that over our original input. So now all we got to do is go to our circle and change its X and Y position. So I already know that the ranges are going to be minus 0.5 and 0.5. So that's kind of the normalization on the U and V land. So we can use that on the center here and the face Y, TY thing here. So now when I move my head around, I got that nice kind of flashlight illuminating only like parts of the image wherever my head is. So now we can also make that react to how far I am from the camera. So I'm going to change the ranges here to like 0.1, 0.5. And I'm going to use that on the radius. So now when I move closer, then you can see that the flashlight gets bigger, and when I move further away, then that kind of spotlight becomes smaller. Another thing that we can add here is a transform. And for that, I'm just going to copy and paste these. And I'm going to change the ranges here to 0.1 on all of them. So now I'm just going to scale it up to 1.3. Doesn't really matter. We're just going to want to see that we can now use X on translate X and the second Y on translate Y. And now when I move my head around, we can it kind of creates that parallax effect in a way. It kind of, explores also different parts of the image. Now we can have these together here with one thing. I think it's kind of interesting. And then one last thing I want to show you here is that we can also copy this one. And then we can maybe set the scale to 1.25 to 1.5. And then use this value on the scale. So now when I move closer to the image, it actually also moves a bit closer to the image. So it really feels like you're interacting with that artwork. So I'm just going to add a null here and just call that BG. Yeah, it's really quite fun already, and it's a very simple example. So let's copy and paste that, go to the second one. So we call this one feedback. And we're just going to get rid of all of these, and also don't need the second ones here. So I'm going to add a rectangle with a resolution of 1280 by 720. I'm going to have no fill alpha for 10 pixels border width. And that's basically it. Then we're going to add a feedback. And as always, we want to have a keyboard in to make sure that we can reset it if we need to by pressing 1 on the keyboard. So we add a transform as well, a blur, which I'm going to bypass for now, and then a composite, which we're going to set to add, and then put that back on the feedback. Transform can now go down, so kind of creating this nice tunnel effect. So let's look at having a transform here as well, and we can add this color, like a grayish color. And now when we play around with the scale, we can really nicely see that kind of tunnel effect. I'm going to go back to my rectangle here, change it to fraction, and change it maybe to 8 here and then 0.85 here. So we kind of have that more width. I'm gonna also turn on the blur, maybe set that to like 4. So it just kind of blurs with each iteration a bit more. Now all we got to do to kind of have that tunnel interactive effect is play around or link the left and right, X and Y, and up and down positions with these. So in this case, I'm actually gonna do, I'm just gonna add a constant here. And let's call that var for variable. I'm gonna call this range. Set it to maybe 0.05. And then on all of my maps, I can now use this value, chop reference, and just put a minus before the first one. So now we can nicely change the range for all of them. If we now also connect these to the tx and ty of the transform and the feedback loop, you can really nicely see the tunnel is now interactive. And it doesn't feel weird at all that I'm just constantly doing this weird movement in front of the camera. But well, anyways, one last thing again we can do here is change the scale. So maybe between like 0.7 and 0.9, we can use this value on the scale. So now when I move closer to the camera, also changes kind of the FOV basically. And you can invert this if you like. You can always invert by just, you know, having here like the bigger number here and the smaller number on the right. And then I don't know, whatever suits you more. Experiment. Yeah, so this is the feedback example. Let's move on and look at the 3D rotation example. So again, I'm going to delete all this except for the BG now. And then we're going to start by adding a box. After that, a transform as well as an attribute create with tangents on. And I'm gonna add a geo. So we're gonna have a little render setup here, camera, and I'm gonna have 2 lights. So copy paste and also an environment light. So for an environment light, we need a top. We need a map. So I'm gonna add this one and add a null. Just call this env for environment map, and then use that here. Cool. Then I'm gonna add a PBR material. And we're gonna just go down to roughness so we can see something, but we're gonna look at that later on. So I'm gonna add a render, put that in here. We might wanna have 32-bit float. And there we go. That's the render setup we're gonna be working with. So first off, very simply, I'm gonna add a transform. Still render setup actually. So just have a black background. There we go. So now I want to change my camera. So I'm actually going to add a null and another null. And we want to have a constraint and a look at. So I'm going to put these on the corresponding fields here. And for the lookup, we don't need to change anything because we want to look at 0, 0, 0. But for the constraint, we now want to change the position of the camera. So we can already see maybe might be like, maybe 2 might be the maximum that we want to rotate it to. So now our variable, we can set that to 2. And then we can use, let's just make this red so it's clear that we're changing things on the constraint. So I'm going to use tx here, ty here. And now when I move my head, I can kind of see different parts of the box, which is pretty interesting. Kind of fun. You're kind of exploring that. And yeah, one more thing that we can do here is, for example, we could either change this value, we could also change the FOV angle here, for example, but I think it's nicer to just work with this. So when we move closer, we actually want to have a smaller value. So maybe something between 3 and 5 is good. So I'm going to change it here to 5 and 3. Go to the camera here, use that here. And so now when I move closer, I also move closer to the box. Cool. Let's make the thing more interesting though, because like this, you don't really feel that much like exploring. Let's add a rectangle, change that to 600 by 200. And then we might want to change the scale here to 0.15 and 0.8. And then add that into layout a couple of times. So we just use the same input, which is kind of not annoying at all to do. We can do top to bottom here and scale resolution, and then add a transform, go to tiling, repeat, and then scale it down to like 0.2. And then we got a nice grid like that. So we could already use that. So we might just want to set that up. Just going to call this maps, or map input. And from here, I'm going to add another null and copy that. I'm going to call the first one color. And the second one, I'm going to call normal. And let's add a normal map top before that. On my PBR, now I go to maps and use this one as color map and this one as a normal map. I'm going to turn off bump though. This is only if I might want to use this. So for now, actually, I'm just going to turn it off. So one thing, first off, that I might want to do is just add a bit more. No, first thing we might want to do is go to box and change it to face outside. So we can already see the whole thing. Then I'm going to add a transform here and a bit of like padding. So I'm just scaling this down. Already looks a bit better, right? And now we can make that even more interesting by adding a noise here. On my noise, I'm going to change it to just noise and might want to change the seed. I'm going to add a ramp and change, like, kind of invert it and add another handle here. So I don't have that strong of a fade out. Then I'm going to add another composite here, composite these. And then I'm going to add a limit here, change this one to round, and then just copy and paste it, connect it here, and change it to ceiling 1. And now we can kind of have this threshold. So maybe something like that is interesting. And then we could also add some rounding here. So maybe like maybe 0.2. And it kind of looks more interesting, I would say. So now we could also add a bit of constant. So you can kind of see that it's a box, and then we can go down for base color to maybe 2.2. Then one other thing that we might want to do here is change our light position. So I'm going to give the first one a color of like this light blue, and the other one I'm going to color orange. And then I'm going to move its position kind of up right, and this one is going to bottom left. So now when I change my view to look from the bottom left, I can see that orange color, and the other way around, I can kind of see that bluish color. And I think that looks really cool. Like you can really kind of see that you're exploring different parts and you kind of want to move your head to see different parts. And obviously you could put in anything here. This is just one example to kind of mimic this almost like a text or something, very abstractly. Yeah, so feel free to use any kind of texture here. And again, we can actually use the normal map if we like, add some bumping, and then it looks a bit more 3D-ish. You could even use a height map, but I'm not gonna really go into that. I'm just gonna show you, you could obviously also use something like grid here, maybe change the aspect ratio. And now we just kind of have this almost like this plate that we're looking at in 3D space. But I think it's a bit more interesting to look at one object from different angles. And this could even be another like imported 3D object, right? Anything, because we're connecting the face tracking with the camera. We can really use any number of geos. We can use any kind of 3D scene, and it's always gonna kind of look like we're looking from there. So let's also look at another way to make it even more interesting. And I'm going to add a bloom here. It's one of my favorite operators that was recently added. And it's just so nice. We can go down maybe with the black level here. So now when I move my head to here, you can already see it kind of really blooms. It really kind of glows a lot, which is nice. We can maybe change this value. We can go down with this as well. So we can really not only see the bloom part, which can be really interesting, or maybe just go up with this a little bit. It just makes it look even nicer. Just play around with these values here, whatever kind of floats your boat. But really mess around with the bloom. It's just the best. And makes the renders in TouchDesigner does not look as bad as they sometimes do. So I'm gonna just copy and paste this and call it 3D grids. And then instead of this little setup here, I'm just gonna delete it and add a sphere sop. And I'm just gonna add a transform and a copy. And then I'm gonna add a box sub and another transform. And this is gonna be in there. So I'm gonna scale the sphere down to 0.1. Then I'm gonna just quickly turn this on and use divisions. I'm gonna go by 7 by 7 by 7 and put that into the copy here. So now, actually, I don't want to have this whole setup. I'm just going to use a new PBR. Fresh start. Might want to turn off all these viewers because they always eat your CPU or GPU. So here I'm just going to scale it up a bit like that, and scale on the Z as well, and scale on the Y, on the X. So I think that looks really nice. And now we can go down with the roughness here, maybe base color much lower as well. You can see it's kind of blinky. So one first thing might be on the sphere that we add, like go higher up with the rows and columns, so it's smoother. And then on the bloom, we just kind of have to see it, like maybe go up with the min. I don't know. Whatever works best for you here. Yeah, I think that's kind of nice. Yeah, so maybe one last thing here is we can move the geos a bit, so we're not right in front of them like so. And another thing might be that in this case, we might not actually want to change the Y, but only the X. So we're literally only going left and right. And I think it just looks quite interesting and trippy. One last thing that could be nice here is that instead of moving closer or further away from the camera, we could change the FOV angle. So maybe something between 30 and 100. So I'll change it maybe to 100 here and 30 here. So now if I use this on the FOV angle and I go closer, then it becomes different. Now actually I think 30 and then 100 is better. So when I'm closer away, it's kind of, or when I move closer, it seems to be going away. I don't know. Whatever you want, however way you like it. But yeah, that's some interesting explorations. Can turn all of them on and try out at the same time. Yeah, the other example that I showed you with the kind of folding images, with the two different ones, I'm going to show you that one very soon. I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial. And yeah, if you want to support me and join the other wonderful people on the Patreon, feel free to support me there via the link in the description. And thank you to everybody who's supporting me. And thank you for watching. And I'll see you on the next video.